Welcome to day 2. My name is Khaled, and today I will introduce you to a great JavaScript stack that works pretty well with Contentful APIs. So let's get started.
Okay, so we now have all our content created in Contentful, and we need to move to coding the actual website. So what we will use in the website is gatsby.js, which is a blazing fast static site generator for React. So if you're not familiar with the React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. I will add some links if you wanna go in details in there. And one of the cool things also with Gatsby is it's using GraphQL as a data layer. So GraphQL is a query language and a runtime for executing the query at the same time. So you use type system to define your data. We get into detail when we start building the website. So first we need to get Gatsby. We go in here to gatsbyjs.org and we hit get started. So this will guide us through to create a basic template, so we don't need to create all the files that we need. So first thing, it's telling us to npm install global Gatsby CLI. So we need to install this. And by the way, npm is a Node package manager because we're using Node.js. If you don't have Node.js, you can go to Node.js in here, and then you'll have the instruction how to install it. And the npm will come in with Node.js by default. Okay, so we installed the Gatsby CLI, and then we can follow along the getting started. So here we need to do Gatsby new, and then the name of the website. So we can call it my journey, and then we hit enter. Here it will install all necessary dependencies and create all the files that we need. Okay, now it's done. Let's cd to that directory. So it's called my journey. So I'm here. To test that, we can do npm run develop. So this will spawn a dev server, and we can actually locally preview the website. And if we make any changes to the website, the server will do an auto refresh for us. So this is the basic template provided by Gatsby. But we actually need to change some stuff. So I will stop my server in here. And the first thing that we need to do is to add the Contentful source plugin for Gatsby. And we need to actually also add another plugin for transform markdown. So if you remember, we created like here in, for example, Sardinia. This is a long text and this is markdown, so it will allow us to, for example, add H2s and so on. And the markdown plugin that we'll install will help us to transform this text to actual HTML. So here, let's install this. We're gonna use npm I, short for install, and then we do Gatsby source Contentful. And then space. Also we have Gatsby transformer remark, and then we hit enter. Okay, our two plugins are installed. So let's open the project, and you can open it in your favorite editor. For me, I'm using Vim. First thing, we need to go to the Gatsby node. So this is where we can actually tell Gatsby to do some stuff for us when building like the website. So we clear off all of that And first thing is we need to import path from path. So this will help us to resolve the path for some files. And then in here we do exports.createPage. You might be wondering what's this exports create pages. So Gatsby, when building the website, we will look into this Gatsby node.js file, and then in there there's some APIs that you can use to override some functionalities. You can find all the API in here. So we'll be using the node interface. So this means at build time. So we go in here, Gatsby node API, and you can see here this is all the list, and then we will use create pages because we want to create some pages dynamically. Okay, so this will accept an object that has the GraphQL function. This function will help us to execute some queries to get some data from Gatsby. And then there's bound action creators, and in here first thing we need to get the create page function from the bound action creator, and then this should return a promise. Again, if you're not familiar with promises, I will include some more details about all of this in the page of the tutorial. So a promise will have a resolve and reject, and in here we first need to define or get the template. So what we want to create dynamically is for every trip that we create, we want Gatsby to create a trip for us automatically. So here we can call this file trip template, and then it will be in the source templates, and then we can call it trip. This is not defined yet, but after we finish the code in here, we will define it later. So here we need to call resolve, and then inside of resolve we have the GraphQL function, and this GraphQL will execute a query. So the query in here, it's actually related or depends on the data that we have or the structure that we have in Contentful. So by default, the schema in Gatsby will be all Contentful and then content type name. So content type name, this is the changing part. So depends on the content type that we defined in here, this will change. So let's say we want to get all the content that was based on the trip. Like if we go to our content, so we want to ask for all the data that's of type trip. And I can see here, so you can see here Sardinia, content type trip. So this content type name will be all Contentful trip. So all Contentful trip means a collection of trips, so all of them, and then we'll have also Contentful trip. So this is an extra D, we'll remove. Okay, so we can specify some arguments here, like only give me the first 100, and then how the schema works here, it has edges, and inside of edges there's a node. which is the actual entry. So if you notice here, we have title, slag, image, and content. And if you go to the content model, these are mapped to IDs. So for example, if you go to the title, you can see the field ID is title. So here, for example, if we want to get the title, we can just tell Gatsby, hey, give us the title field from there. So yeah, in here, we will need just the ID and slag. The slag, which is this field, and you can see the field ID is slag. Okay, so this GraphQL function will return some results. And hopefully, if the schema is correct, we will have a result without errors. But for safety, we can just check if results.errors. If there's errors, we reject. So we show the user in the command line that, hey, there's errors, and then we reject with those errors. Otherwise, so if we have result, we'll have something called object called data that holds all the queries result, and then now we can follow this path. So it's all contentful trip edges, and for the edges we just do for each, and then for each edge we will create a page for that. So here it's time to call the create page function that will accept an object, and then first we need to define the path. So the path will be edge.node.slag. So this will be like our, for example, something like example.com/Sardinia, for example, or mywebsite.com/Sardinia. And we tell Gatsby which component that we'll use to render. So it's kind of the view, we define the view for that template. And then we give it this strip template that we will create. And then here we have a context object. This is very useful if you want to pass in some data from here to the page to be created. And for this we will pass in slag. Why slag? Because we will use it inside of the page to get exactly just the data of this page. So it's kind of identifying, hey, this page is actually talking about this path. All right. So in here, we need to return if everything is fine. So here is all is good. We need to save and go to source and add our template. So here I'm gonna add a folder called templates, and inside of it we'll have trip.js. And as you can see here, there's trip.js. In here we need to import React, which is the JavaScript UI framework that we'll use. And then we need to import the component from React also. And then also we need to import prop types. This is a helper to define the properties that we can pass to our component. And it's coming from prop types. And now we can define the class of trip that extends the component, so it will inherit the functionality of the component. This component will have a render function here, and a render function, we can now extract some data, which we'll get to in a second. So we need to get a title, and we get the content from the props .data .contentful trip. I will tell you where this contentful is coming from. So here we have the data, and we need to return the actual UI that the React needs to render. So it's gonna be a div, and inside of this div we'll have simply an h1, and inside of the h1 we will display the title. So the bracket, these curly brackets are telling React that, hey, we actually want the actual value of this expression. And then for the content, we just have it inside of the div. And this is a bit tricky, so just bear with me and then I'll explain all of that. So here we can do dangerously set inner HTML, and this will be an object with HTML, and then here we'll have like content dot child markdown dot HTML, child markdown dot HTML. Okay, so now let's explain where's this data property coming from. So in here we have our trip. The trip has already prop types, and this is actually an object. This is where you define the property that you expect. A property is something like, for example, this dangerously set in HTML is actually a property. Stuff like that. So here we have data, and it's prop types, and then it's type object, and is required. So we actually telling React, hey, this component is expecting a data property, and this data property is required. Here we export our component, so we can import it from other files. And then the magic part now is to actually tell Gatsby, hey, we actually need to run a GraphQL query in here so we can get some data specifically for this page. So this is a string template which is tagged by GraphQL. In here we need to actually define the query. So here we name it trip query, and it's accepting a slug. So this slug is actually coming from the context object that we passed in Gatsby node. And then in here we need to get just a single trip, so it's not all contentful trip. It's actually just contentful trip. Notice the all means like collection, and just this is a singular trip. And we want just one trip with a slug equal to the slug that we passed when creating the page. So here's a slug, and we tell GraphQL which fields that we're interested in. So we need to get the title, slug, content, and then the content, since we added the plugin, the transformer plugin, the remark plugin, Gatsby will transform it and then add an extension to the GraphQL data, so we can actually get the HTML right away. So it's child markdown remark, and it's gonna be HTML in here. Here this needs to be child markdown remark as exactly in the query. So notice here like content.child markdown and then HTML. Okay, so the query is done, and here we need to save. So let's tell Gatsby about our Contentful website, which is through the config. So first thing, here we need to change the title to, for example, like Khaled's journey, for example. Okay, and here we need to add more plugins to this plugins array. So first thing, we need to add Contentful. So how you pass in a plugin using Gatsby, you can either specify just the name of the plugin if you don't have any configs, or you can have an object so you'll be able to pass in some data to your plugin. So here we put in resolve, and here the name of the plugin. So it's Gatsby source Contentful, and options. So here we need to provide some credentials for the plugin so it will be able to pull in the data from Contentful. So we'll have a space ID and access token. So how to get these? Very simple. We go to our Contentful space, settings, API keys, and there's already an example key created for us, but we can actually add another one. If we go in here, we can get the space ID from here. So we hit copy, and then we paste it there. And then for the token, we get the content delivery API access token. We copy it and we paste it there. So that's that. And we need to add our plugin, the transformer, to parse all the markdown. So it's Gatsby transformer remark, and we hit save in here. Okay, and so let's actually run the website and check if we have any errors. So if you do run npm run develop, you can see here there's already some content coming from Contentful. And then, okay, so there's actually some errors. Okay, so I just made some errors in here for the trip. Yeah, you're probably screaming, we're screaming at me. So here we close this and we hit save, and then npm run again. Okay, looks like it's working. Let's refresh. So maybe there's another error. Indeed, there's in the console. Oh, yeah. So that's again me doing some typos, and sorry about that. Here it needs to be trip. If we save, this will be compiled. Hey, we can see the website. But how to test that we actually created the page for the trip? We can actually trigger a 404 in Gatsby. So in develop mode, Gatsby has a really neat feature. So if you hit the 404, it will give you all the page that was created. So you can see here, indeed, there is a Sardinia page. And if we click on it, you can see this is the title and this is the Wikipedia text. And to verify, you can go to our content and click in Sardinia. you can see this is the title and this is the content in here. So if we go back here, we have the list. We should have the list of the trips and remove this the dummy content. So what we're gonna do is go to pages and see index. So index has this content in here. So Gatsby, if you put anything in pages, it will create automatically the page for you. So here in index, this is meaning the home page. We have this. We can actually remove all of that. And now we need to actually list all of our trips in the index page. All right, so first thing, we actually need to define the query. So we can do export const and then the query or page query. And this would be GraphQL. And then it's a tagged page. It should be GraphQL, yeah. And we name it query page or home query. Let's name it page query. And here we are telling Gatsby to give us all contentful trip. So we're getting all the trips in here. And we need to put in a filter to just get the English US locale. So it's by default English US, but it's just here to make sure that we get only that. If we have multiple locales, also we can do some sorting. And then we sort based on fields. We can have the created at. This is by default provided by Contentful when you create an entry. And then we can define the order, which is descending. All right, so again, since it's a collection, we have edges, and inside of edges, we'll have a node. And here we're interested in title, slug, and content. So in content, we can get the child, markdown, remark, but instead of getting the HTML, we can get the excerpt. So think of the excerpt as the teasing for the blog post. So it's like showing just the first 100 character. And also we can get the image, and Gatsby will add a nice extension here in the GraphQL, so we can actually get some responsive sizes. So we can do responsive resolution, and we need to get something with the width of, let's say, 300 and height of 300. And from there, we need to get just the src. All right, so we have our data in here, and index page here. There's two ways to define a component in React. So either as a function or as a class. So in here we have the case of a function, because we don't need any more complex logic. Okay, so in the index we can have a list, and this list will have the class name, of, let's say, blog post. We'll use that later to do some basic styling. And then in here, we need to loop through all the data and display it in here. So we can do data. So here, sorry, it's gonna be data. And then inside of data, we have all contentful trip, and then edges. And then we can do a map on this. So map is looping through the array, and then we can return or do some transformation on these items, and then we end up with an array of these transformed edges. So here the transformation means that we will actually transform this into a React component. So here we directly return, we can call this trip, and then we give it the node, and then here we do edge node, and we can define this trip in here. So we can do const trip, and it's gonna be a function that accepts the node and returns a list item, and inside of the list item we'll have first the image, and the image will have a source of should be equal node dot image dot responsive resolution dot src, and then we define the link, so to, and then here it will link to the Slack. So when we click on the list item, we can go directly to the detail of the page. And here we can have an h3 for the title, and then it's gonna be node.title, and then we close the h3 and we close our link. Yeah, and finally we can have the div to show some content, and inside of the div we'll have node.content.child markdown remark.excerpt. All right, so if we save, okay, we have some missing stuff in here. Okay, what is it saying? Okay. Yep, it's here. We actually missing a closing tag for this, and then we hit save. Okay, I think we have another error in the console. Let's see that. Yeah, of course. Sorry about that. We actually need to return what we have in here. And then we hit save again, and yay, we have our listing of the blog post. And then if we click here, so there's, okay, another error. Place side of null, okay. Yep, okay. If we refresh, it should be fine. Yep. Great, so we can actually add some CSS to improve this a little bit. So I have already copied some, and then we can paste it in here and we hit save. Hey, we have now a better styling, so we can click in here and we have the page. Okay, one last thing to do is to add the about page. So we can simply create it here and then we call this about, and in here we can just import React from React, and then we can define it as a function. We call it about, and this will get the data. And we export it. And then here we can get a query to get the content of just the about page. So this will be like page query. And it's again GraphQL. And then here it's query, page query. And here we are interested in just one item. So in here it's gonna be Contentful page, and the Contentful page will have slag of, it needs to be about, and then here we actually need to get the data for that. So to get the data for this, we will get the title. So here, sorry, this needs to be an object. So the slag needs to be equal to, and then remove this. We get the title, and then we can get the content. Again, here we can do child markdown remark, and then HTML. And we here need to return something to display the data. So here we return a div, and inside of the div we'll have like h1, and here this will be data.title, and the content will be inside of the div, and then here this will be the data.content.child markdown remark.html. Oh, sorry, made a mistake in here, because this needs to be the dangerously set inner HTML, and then we close this, and this needs to be a property HTML, and then we hit save. Yeah, made a mistake here. This needs to be a const, and we hit save. All right. Okay, so probably we need to restart. Okay, there's a graphical error. Okay, so this needs to be, for example, about query. Yep. And then we should go to about page and okay, cannot read child markdown remark of undefined. Yeah, because probably we need to run this again. Okay. Sorry. So probably we need to console log this dot. Oh, actually not. Because this needs to be data dot contentful page, and this needs to be dot contentful page. Right again. Yeah. Okay, so now that's fixed. And here, this is the home page. The last thing is probably we can add just some navigation, so we can go to the template page. We can go to the layout, which is will be shown everywhere, and then we can see here it's including the header. So we can go to the component header, and in here just add some link, or just like nav, and then here we can have a link to about, which is our page, and then we call this about, and then if we hit save, we should probably see the link, and then when we click it, it's going to the home page. Of course, you can style that and so on. We won't go deep here in creating dynamically all the pages and navigation, but I will include that in other videos. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so that's it for this super long video, and see you on the next one.
That's it for today, but before I go, I have a small exercise for you. We forget to display the author in the trip page, so that's your exercise for today. See you tomorrow.